Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's word study, where we're going to take another look at the great sign of Revelation 12, which is repeated in Isaiah 66, as well as in the book of Enoch, chapter 61 and 62. This is my 2017 Rapture Extra. Now, some of you may not consider the book of Enoch, that is Enoch, to be valid scripture, in which case you can just dismiss what I have to say from that. But I consider the book of Enoch, to be inspired by Elohim, as I consider all the books that were found in the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries. Now, 3.5 months ago, on June 15th, I published my 2017 Rapture Update video, which contained my most extensive compilation of biblical prophecies and signs of the times that were available as of that date. If you haven't seen it, there's a link to it beneath today's video. When I made that video back in June, I had only just found this amazing revelation about Yahweh's word presenting two births in this great sign of Revelation 12. And I was just beginning to get a grip on delivering the details of it all. It's an amazing study, my friends, because the woman we see clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and with a crown of 12 stars on her head, is a sign in the Shamayim, the heavens, that is prophesied to us not only in Revelation 12, but also very clearly in both Isaiah 66 and Enoch 61 and 62. And they all three reveal two births happening with the woman. One birth is the Zakar, a singular reference to those who are raptured before the tribulation begins. And the other birth is the rest of her children, a plural reference to those who are awakened and come to believe during the tribulation. And Yahweh gave this nevuah, this prophecy, first through Enoch, that's Enoch, way before he gave it the second time through Yeshayahu, Isaiah, some 2,800 years ago, and finally the third time through Yochanan, John, around 900 years after he gave it to us through Isaiah. And so, this great sign is seen in Enoch chapter 61 and 62, then in Isaiah chapter 66, and finally in Revelation 12, and this magnificent sign, the announcement that is, has now been fulfilled. The announcement has been made. Just this past September 23rd, the coming rapture, followed by the 7-year tribulation, was officially announced in Elohim's celestial chronicles of the Shamayim. Its time has come, my friends, and now here we all are, wondering what to expect. So let's look carefully at these three nevuot, these three prophecies. First, since we are all most familiar with Revelation 12, let's look at how clearly we are being told about these two births. One is the birth of the Zakar, the male child. This is the event of the Net Chetef, the rapture, and happens before the tribulation begins. And the other is the birth of the rest of her children, commonly referred to as the tribulation saints, and happens during the tribulation. These are those who were left behind at the Netchatef, the rapture, and wake up to a true belief during the 7-year tribulation. This Nevuah opens with the appearance of a great sign, and this sign has never appeared on one of Yahweh's Moedim, one of his appointments with the world, there are 7 of them, until this year. And so it has never been significant until this year. Now also, this great sign speaks of an intensely important event, which is soon to happen. Soon, not immediately, soon. And in Revelation 12, there are 4 verses that deserve special attention. First, verses 2 and 5, where in verse 2 we see the rest of her children, and in verse 5 we see the Zakar, the male child. And then verses 13 and 17, where in verse 13 we see the Zakar being spoken of again, and in verse 17 we see the rest of her children being spoken of again. And these 4 verses alone give us quite a picture to put together and look at. Revelation 12, verse 1, introduces the great sign, a wonder seen in the Shamayim, which is warning us of future events that are of ominous significance. And that is what I was thanking Scott Clark for in last Saturday's Walking in the Word video. Scotty spent literally thousands of hours examining the positions of the constellations, looking for all the elements needed to say, here it is. And he showed us all way beforehand that this Nevuah, this prophecy, was officially announced on September 23rd, 2017. So we now know that we've all been served a notice. Yes? Okay. Let's study the most familiar Nevuah of the 3, the most familiar prophecy of them all, Revelation 12, starting with verses 1 through 5. There appeared a great and wondrous sign in the Shamayim, the heavens, warning of future events that are of ominous significance. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars upon her head. And, being pregnant, she cried out in labor and in pain, as she was about to give birth. Note, we'll call this the second birth, and there we very clearly see that the woman is having labor pains before she delivers. That is, the tribulation has already started, and then she delivers what are to be clarified as the rest of her children. Then another ominous sign was seen in the Shamayim. Behold, a huge, fiery red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 kingly crowns upon his heads. His tail swept across the sky and dragged down 1/3 of the stars and flung them to the earth. And the dragon stationed himself in front of the woman who was about to be delivered, so that he might devour her child as soon as she brought it forth. Note, those are singular references right there. And also, 1/3 of the stars should also be read as 1/3 of the Malachim, a third of the angels. Yahweh's word usually means both literal stars as well as malachim, angels. And she brought forth a zakar, usually seen as a male child, one who is destined to rule all the nations with an iron staff. And her zakar was netchatef, raptured, caught up to Yahweh and to his throne. Note, we'll call this the first birth. And here we can very clearly see that the woman's zakar is born and netchatef, caught up, before the woman goes into labor. That is, before the tribulation begins. Now, let's skip ahead and look at verses 13 through 17. And when the dragon saw that he was cast down to the earth, he went in pursuit of the woman who had given birth, past tense, who had given birth to the zakar, the male child. But the woman was supplied with the 2 wings of a giant eagle, so that she might fly from the presence of the serpent into the wilderness, to the retreat where she is to be kept safe and fed for a time, times, and half a time, that is 3½ years, or 1260 days. Then out of his mouth the serpent poured forth water like a flood after the woman, that she might be carried off with the torrent. But the earth came to the rescue of the woman, and the ground opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood of water which the dragon had poured out from his mouth. And so the dragon was enraged at the woman, and he went away to wage war on the rest of her children, plural, on those who obey Yahweh's commandments and who have the testimony of Yeshua HaMashiach, those who adhere to Yahweh's commands and who bear witness to Yeshua. Wow, what a fascinating picture. In verse 1, the stage is set. In verse 2, we see children, plural, being born after the tribulation begins. In verses 3 and 4, we see the fiery red dragon, Satan, situated in the interest of devouring, that is, forcibly appropriating and destroying her child and or her children. Here, the original language suggests that both are of interest to Satan. But in verse 5, we see the zakar, that's the singular male child, being born and netchatef, raptured, before the tribulation begins and is out of Satan's reach. Then, in verses 6 through 12, the woman, Israel, flees to the wilderness where she's protected by Yahweh for 3½ years. War breaks out in the Shamayim, the heavens, where Michael, and his malachim, his angels, defeat the fiery red dragon, Satan, and his minions by means of the blood of the Lamb of Yahweh and by the word of their testimony, and casts them all to the earth. And verse 12 delivers a proclamation of joy to those in the Shamayim, and a great warning of woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Then, in verse 13, we see that Hashatan, Satan, the fiery red dragon, goes after Israel, the woman, and that the Zakar is now past tense. The Nechetef, the rapture, has already happened. And in verses 14 through 16, we see Israel is given protection in the wilderness for 3.5 years. Satan tries some things but fails. And finally, in verse 17, we see Hashatan, Satan, going after the rest of her children. The rest of her children are those we always refer to as the tribulation saints. That is, those who become believers, and those who truly firm up their belief after the Nechetef, after the rapture has occurred, and during the 7-year tribulation. Now, if all that isn't clear enough, Yahweh had already given us this nevuah through Enoch, who knows how many thousands of years ago, with an equally precise, descriptive, and exciting picture. In Enoch, chapter 61, verses 7 through 13, we see, among some other very exciting things, that the Kodeshim, that is, all those who love the things of Elohim instead of loving the things of the world, have been taken in the Nechetef, the rapture, and are already in the Shamayim. And that is followed by chapter 62, where we look at verses 4 and 5, which is speaking of all those who love the things of the world instead of loving the things of Elohim. And we read, "Then pain will come upon them as a woman in travail, when her child enters the mouth of the womb, and she has pain in bringing forth. And one portion of them will look on the other, and they will tremble. They will be sad-faced, and pain will seize them when they see the Bane of Adam, Yeshua, sitting on the throne of his esteem." When one portion of her children will look on the other and be terrified, I see that as the rest of her children will look upon the Zakar, and they will tremble with the terrible realization of what they missed by missing out on being taken in the Nechetef. And, same as Revelation 12, the woman has 2 types of children being born. One birth is of the Zakar, those who already have Yahweh's mark on them, who are born before the tribulation, taken to the Shamayim. And the other is of those who were attached to the things of the world, wound up being left behind at the Nechetef, the rapture, and then waking up and making Elohim number 1 on a list of 1 during the tribulation. And finally, when we look at Yeshayahu, Isaiah, chapter 66, verses 7 and 8, we see these 2 births again. In verse 7, we see the Zakar, the male child. And in verse 8, we see the rest of her children. In verse 7, we read, "Before she travailed, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she was delivered of a Zakar." Strong's number H2145. A male child is often the interpretation of Zakar in English. And there we see the Zakar being taken in the Nechetef before the tribulation begins. Then, in verse 8 we read, "Who has heard of such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or will a nation be born all at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children," plural, and there we see the rest of her children being brought forth during the tribulation. The zakar is singular, the male child, because it is speaking of those who are taken in the net chetef, the rapture, those who are the bride of Yeshua, those who are made echad, one, with Elohim, singular. The rest of her children is a plural reference because it is speaking of those who wake up during the 7-year tribulation and are saved through the work of Yeshua, but are not the bride and are not made echad. They're not made one with Elohim. And that is the realization that causes them to feel a great and painful sadness, seeing what they missed out on when they look upon the Kodeshim in the Shamayim next to Yeshua sitting on the throne of his esteem. Note, in the original Aramaic Hebrew, the father's word seen in English as male child is zakar. Zakar is literally a remembering of those whose names have been written in the book of Zakar, as seen in Malachi chapter 3, verse 16. Then those who worshipped Yahweh with awe-filled reverence spoke to one another, and Yahweh paid attention and heard it. And a book of Zakar, often interpreted as a book of remembrance, you can interpret that in a number of ways, was written before him of those who worship Yahweh, who value and revere his name. And this zakar, this remembering, also speaks of a mark, my friends. It speaks of Yahweh having remembered his called out ones by placing his mark, his zakar, on them, that they be recognized. Psalm 112, verse 6 tells us that the righteous will be zakar. They will be remembered, they will be recognized, and they will be marked forever. So, we've determined that the birth of the zakar speaks of Yahweh's called out ones, those he has chosen as a gift for Yeshua HaMashiach, Yahweh's Yachid, his one and only heir. And it also tells us that those who have been remembered and marked are to be net chetef, kidnapped, taken up to the Shamayim. Now, my friends, we have a full and clear picture of what the great sign of Revelation 12 is telling us. Yahweh Elohim made his announcement official on September 23rd, 2017, and now we are watching. We are looking up because we can know that our redemption is here. The watchmen, you know who we all are doing their jobs. They are watching. They don't know when, except that it will be then. And they don't know because they aren't supposed to know. They're supposed to watch. That's why they're called the watchmen and not the nomen. Yes? I wished I had said that in my walk in the Word last Saturday. There's another watchman out there, a number of you alerted me to, a guy named Stephen Gerard. And Stephen explains why October 20th is, according to his understanding, the proper date for Yom Zakar, the Feast of Trumpets. Now, I'm putting this out there because we have another watchman saying, well, look, there's this. And he has some very solid information. But, I don't know. Whenever somebody says a date and he's saying October 20th, I just think they're always going to be wrong, because Yahweh is always going to make it plain and clear to everyone that he is the Nomen. Everybody else are just watchmen. I'll have a link for you to click if you want to watch his video. It's good information. It's an hour long because it requires some explaining of the Jewish rules about properly determining Yahweh's Moedim, the timing. It's worth your time. I think he's got something worth considering. Matith Yahu, chapter 24, verse 42, we see, watch therefore, because you don't know nothing. That's paraphrased. You don't know the hour. Matthew 25:13. Watch therefore, because you don't know nothing, the day or the hour. Mark chapter 13, verse 33. Watch and pray, because you don't know nothing. You don't know when the time is. Mark chapter 13, verse 35. Watch therefore, because you don't know nothing. You didn't know that was in the Word? Paraphrase. It says, watch therefore, because you don't know when the Adon comes. He told us himself, I will come at an hour when you do not expect. Some people say, oh, he's just talking to the Jews there. Well, the Jews aren't expecting him, so I don't know. My point is, remember to watch. And that's what we're doing. Why? Because we don't know when. We are watchmen. We are not nomen. And that's our study for this week, my friends. As always, I hope and I pray that these studies are a constant and continual berachah to you and yours. I hope this outline, 3 separate prophecies, first with Enoch, then with Isaiah, and finally with John in Revelation. This is an important sign. Somebody said, what? It's the season of the rapture. I like that term. Anyway, Abba willing, I'll see you all here again next week. Until then, shalom, chavarim.
Now 2,000 years have gone by, it's another working day. Some would rather let it lie, but the question still remains.